Well, yes, it's me, Arwen's lesbian cousin, here to talk about swords. Hi, and welcome back to the channel where I talk about arms and armour, women's histories, and the weird, wonderful ways these two subjects often intersect. And today, let's tackle The Lord of the Rings. So, am I a fan? Well, I'm pretty sure that one of my very first pieces of fan art was of Bag End, my artist's signature is inspired by Tolkien's, and my first sword, is called Arwen. She's right here. I love her so much. So, enemies, arch rivals, and Melin, which I've heard is the plural of melon, you do the math. And when it came to Peter Jackson's film trilogy adaptation, I was there, Gandalf. I was there 3,000 years ago at the cinema. Well, it was only 20 years ago. It was 20 years ago. Oh god. Okay, existential crisis over, we're back on track. Early on, I was fascinated by the making of the trilogy adaptation and particularly the work of the Weta Workshop when it came to arms and armour. I'm not saying that The Lord of the Rings can be blamed completely for my current obsession with arms and armour and swordswomen, but I'm not saying that. And like Aragorn, I too wanted to be a sword-wielding adventurer with a partner with beautiful hair. And on that note, let's talk about Arwen. So in the books, we first come across Arwen in Rivendell, where the Fellowship of the Ring is first formed, and she's reunited with her love, Aragorn, for whom she will end up giving up her elven immortality. But when it comes to her first appearance in the film, things are a little bit more action-packed. She rides out to meet Aragorn and the hobbits, and in doing so replaces a character from the books, Glorfindel, forever in our hearts, and rides hard to Rivendell with an injured Frodo, pursued by the Dark Riders, leading to this iconic moment by the Bruenn River, where Arwen dares the Dark Riders to cross the river to come and fetch Frodo, which I do not have footage for, but, well, if I must, gotta do everything in this job. If you want him, come and claim him. It's terrible. My precious. And that's why I don't have enough gravitas and elegance to play an elf. In the end, it is more effective to simply flush the Dark Riders away with her river magic, but you know, sword. Though my viewing of said scene is forever changed by the fact that there is a blooper reel out there that shows that Liv Tyler initially stabbed herself with the tip of said sword. She was fine, but it still makes you look at that scene quite differently. So, to find out more about the sword, let's take a look at the original source material. And then put it back down again, because this sword straight up doesn't exist in the books. Or, you know, the book, if you're like me and you just like carrying around a massive copy of the entire trilogy of The Lord of the Rings. It's entirely made up for the purposes of giving Arwen a sword in the trilogy film adaptation. And it even has its own backstory, even though we learn about its backstory off screen. It originally belonged to Arwen's grandmother, the elven princess Idril. And this blade isn't just Arwen's, it was also her father's, Elrond. Elrond wields his mother Idril's blade on multiple occasions in flashbacks, presumably before handing it over to Arwen, just as his mother handed it down to him. The sword has a curved blade, and inscriptions on it say, oh, here we go. Any elven pronunciation specialists, please correct me in the comments, but it says, Ein estar Hadhafang ich hatholhen, than arodan I thang an I Arwen. Or, this blade is called Hadhafang, a noble defense against the enemy throng for a noble lady. The name of the sword itself means throng cleaver. Cleaver of throngs. The cleaver made for throngs. That cleaver. And if you're wondering why the term Arwen is on the sword inscription, Arwen means noble lady in Sindarin, one of the multiple elven languages that Tolkien invented for Lord of the Rings. We love the dedication. So all things considered, it is conceived as an elven lady's sword. However, this sword is intriguing compared to many other swords in the film. Some have imagined that it may have been inspired by a katana, a Japanese sword which is characterized by its curved blade. Katanas are meant to be held with two hands, which is what the long grip is for. And even if we can't see Arwen using it, we do know how she handles it using only one hand. Elven sword-wielding math. For more of a clue in terms of its inspiration, however, we have to look at that one iconic action scene Arwen gets to have where she is on horseback. In case you're wondering, the horse's name in Lord of the Rings is Asphalos. And yes, he's actually in the books, and he's played by 3 horses in different scenes, called Florian, Hero, and Odie. Close the horse appreciation bracket. So curved blade, using a single hand, and most likely on horseback, because it's mentioned that Arwen is, after all, the swifter rider. Enter the saber. Characterized by being curved, check. Held with one hand, check. And favoured on horseback due to the more fluid cutting motions it can enact, alongside thrusting, check. These sabres were more commonly used in 17th century Europe, and notably the cavalry sabre, but prior versions existed as earlier as medieval Europe and even much earlier in 6th century China. And I've done a previous video on the sabre, all about why we open champagne bottles with swords, so you can check it out, and hopefully I'm pointing at the right place on my screen.
Hello, it's Editing Claire here from the future. So at some point in the process of editing all of this, I was looking at the prologue again in A Fellowship of the Ring and was noticing that actually Elrond was using Hadhafang in close quarters on foot with 2 hands. I thought, oh god, have I just completely messed up this theory? Maybe, hey, it happens and you've just got to roll with it. But then I looked at the more recent portrayal of Hadhafang on screen, which is actually in the Hobbit film trilogy, and in the Battle of the Five Armies, Elrond is using Hadhafang one-handed. So that's interesting. I mean, in exactly the same way, you can't be so fixed about what weapon you're using in which context. You could technically use a katana type weapon on horseback. It's just not ideal because it's not conceived to be used on horseback and it's not a cavalry weapon. At the end of the day, it's a fantasy sword, so it doesn't really matter. I also made this meme in the process of my existential crisis over whether or not it was truly inspired by a saber or a katana, so enjoy. But I just wanted to point that out because I found that interesting.
So I'm not an arms and armour consultant for a massive film franchise yet, but I do find it interesting how much of a bold departure, design-wise, this elven blade is from other swords in the franchise. Most of them, such as Anduril or Glamdring, seem more inspired by medieval longswords. Théoden King's sword Herogrim, as a one-handed sword, feels inspired by early medieval Viking era and early English swords, and it even feels quite distinct from Sting, Bilbo and Frodo's sword, which is an elven short sword or dagger. Similar in design to even earlier designs like the Xyphos, the Greek swords of the Iron Age. But I think that this piece of adaptation world building is interesting in a universe in which different species operate on radically different time frames, but so do the weapons that they wield and design. Elves are millennia old compared to men. They had sensibly more time to come up with new ways of sword fighting and designing swords that may include something slightly futuristic by other sword-wielding species standards. Maybe the elves by that point would have already figured out that this type of blade was the most optimal type of blade for fighting on horseback. Ultimately though, we do also need to remember that this is a fantasy world. Things will fall between the cracks, but also it shouldn't really be beholden to strict historical accuracy standards, lest we forget the beautiful but monstrous giant flail in The Return of the King. It's so goofy, but I love it. And also, this is the same film adaptation that had one of the orcs say, "Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys." Meat? Yeah, okay, meat, yes, but like a menu? But how effective is a sword when it comes to adding to Arwen's character? Well, I love this particular scene for pretty biased reasons. You know, I love sword ladies, and I thought that Liv Tyler was an excellent casting choice for Arwen and really embodied that sense of fierce warrior woman aesthetic. I just wish we'd seen more of her, including more dimension to her as an elven sword wielder. I think there are some issues in trying to make a woman character more badass by plonking a sword in her hands, with not much elaboration in terms of her backstory or her motivations, and I think that some of this may have happened with Arwen in this particular context. Arwen is shown as much more combative and action-oriented than she was in the books, for, I think, about 5-10 minutes of screen time combined. I haven't done the exact calculations, but it doesn't really happen at any other point in the trilogy, and the trilogy adaptation actively chose not to expand on this by cutting Arwen out of scenes in which she was fighting at Helm's Deep in the Two Towers. Though funnily enough, although they tried to cut her out of everything editing-wise, apparently you can still see her in some of the crowd scenes, which I find quite fun. The Sword Lady Revenge. You can never cut us out entirely. So ultimately, love the concept. Some doubts about the execution. And in those moments, it's also good to remember that a powerful, strong, complex woman character doesn't have to have a sword, doesn't have to exude strength and power by arms and blades alone. And that applies to any gender, really. And really, I think that's what makes the strengths of The Lord of the Rings in the first place as a story. We can be critical of the fact that there are not many women in the main cast of The Lord of the Rings, though for me, representation is really not a numbers game, but really about the quality of the portrayal. But what we can appreciate is that, at heart, the real battles of Middle-earth are not fought with a sword. These battles are fought with solidarity, friendship, and goodwill. Strategy, bloodshed, and battle do certainly play into it, don't get me wrong. There is a large military, strategy, and warfare component to Lord of the Rings, which I love. But on the side of the characters that we root for, it's in the quest for peace, not power. And I think that's why the story continues to resonate with so many people, regardless of gender, beyond representation alone. Though anyone and everyone should see themselves represented in these fantasy worlds without it ever taking anything away from anybody else's experience, both in artistic interpretations and in works inspired by Middle-earth. But on a higher level, it's all about the themes that resonate with such a wide range of people, including people who have independently reinterpreted this story in countless ways, and themes that we continue to hold on to as future adaptations, big and small, reinterpret and reimagine the world of Middle-earth, one sword-wielding woman at a time. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and join this fun, chaotic sword lady extravaganza. You can also check out my ramblings on swords and sword ladies on social media at Calming Claire, and you can also check out my donation corner to remain involved and aware of what is happening right now, and donate if you can. Stay safe, sword lovers, and see you in another video. Legolas, what do you else I see? Taking the hobbits to Isengard, to Isengard, to Isengard. The Balrog of Mordor. What did you say?